I don't know what we're talking about. I'm going to have a seltz. You want to just explain to the fine people listening at home what you just used as an abbreviation for seltzer? I'm going to have a seltz.
It's not what I said.
Like what, you're going to have an attorney? Like that sounds like someone's attorney.
That's not what I said.
I'm going to go call Seltz, my lawyer.
Didn't I? I think I said seltzy, didn't I?
No, you said Seltz.
Oh, okay. Well, you know, the girls abbreviate things like, you know, froyo and hocho. So
what's hocho?
Hot chocolate.
What? What the hell is hocho?
It's hot chocolate. I just said.
You made this up. Or instead of Howard Johnson's a hojo, that's gonna really date us. Is there anyone under the age of 40 who has ever actually been to a functional Howard Johnson's? Because I knew Howard Johnson's to be like a La Quinta Inn or like a Days Inn or like one of those like roadside motels. But apparently it was a restaurant.
I was about to say, I thought it was a restaurant.
Have you ever been to one?
I think so.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fascinating to me. I don't
remember where it was.
I've never, because they were like a roadside.
Right, and
like clam strips.
When I was growing up, I went on road trips every summer with my parents. We didn't fly much. We just
And you went to a hojo?
Everywhere. I'm pretty sure at one point we went to a Howard Johnson. It's like a Golden Corral. It's like a
family
buffet style.
Well, apparently it used to be fancier, and then it went down market because it was supposed to be like, you know, the place, like, you know, Howard Johnson is where they have like white tablecloth, and then it's sort of falling downhill.
I think I'm remembering that correctly because I've only gone possibly once, and it was on vacation. So
there's a whole genre of American restaurants that don't exist anymore, and right now they're pulling up, you know. They're pulling up the foundations on Applebee's and Chili's and TGI Fridays and stuff like that. But there's a whole generation of restaurants before that, like a Hojo, that just don't exist.
I can't think of another example. Well, okay, so I had growing up something called calendars. Did you guys have those out here?
No.
So it was made by the same people who make Marie calendars, like the frozen dinners. Oh. They had like their company had a restaurant called Calendars, and it was like an Applebee's, and it would think it was just in the South.
But we had Marie Callender's restaurants.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, they branded them as Marie Callender's.
Oh, ours were just called Calendars.
Well, I think that before is she a real person?
I don't know.
I know that what is it? I want to say Uncle Tony's. I mean, Auntie Anne's. I don't think that was a real person. But I think that C's Candy was a real person. Mary C.
Yeah.
Linda C. Debbie C. I don't know. See you next Tuesday. That's how I would rebrand them. But, okay. I think it's like Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. Not Ruth Chris's. It's Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. So Chris Steakhouse is the name of the place. I think Callender's was an existing restaurant. And then as they grew more and more, and then maybe she died, it was Marie Callender's. And it put a face on it, and it's like, look at the chicken pot pie. Those are outstanding. Like, I would go to Marie Callender's all the fucking time because they had a salad bar, and normally it'd be like, ew, gross salad bar, but it was the best, freshest salad bar, like, anywhere, which is also another thing that doesn't exist anymore. It's a salad bar and a soup bar. But they had, like, real good ranch, real good croutons, like, bacon bits and shit.
Why are we talking about this? There was the best soup and salad bar, obviously they don't exist anymore, Sweet Plantation and Sweet Tomatoes.
Oh, that was good, yeah. That was so good.
But the ones that do exist, the best that I can think of is Ruby Tuesday. Do you have those out here?
I've heard of them. I don't think I've ever been to one. There's Red Robin, which also blows. But okay, so Callender's, but I'm talking about old school velvet booth type of places. So, like, you know, for LA people, Norm's or Mel's, those diners are still around. Canner's Deli, Jewish, you know, that Izzy's, Arts, Brent's. But I'm talking about, like, have you ever been to a Peppermill before?
No.
It's this odd place, like, you walk in and it looks like 1975. So there's a mirrored ceiling. and little mirrored panels everywhere, and like dark velvet booths, dark floor, like everything is dark with little spotlights. And they have them. I think they still have them in Vegas and Tahoe. They're mostly gone, but it was a place you went for breakfast, or you go at dinner and you get like a sirloin steak or something like that. So it wasn't like upscale, but it was still like better than just going to a drive-through. And it was kind of a roadside place, and the old people love it.
Well, my favorite of those Americana restaurants, I guess, for lack of a better term, chain restaurants, is Cracker Barrel. I will die on that hill.
I've never been to one. Or a Waffle House. Does that disqualify me from the primary?
Yes. No, Cracker Barrel is nationwide, but it is kind of region specific. The best ones I've ever been to have been in the South. There's something different. The food generally is the same, but there's something that's different about the way it's made in the South. I can't explain it.
Well, I think it's the people who make it there.
Possibly.
It's not made by Mexicans. That's why food in the South is good. Mexicans make great Mexican food, and occasionally branching out into Italian and similar cuisines. But you can't have American comfort-style food made by people who are not the descendants of American slavery. I'm sorry. That's where I think that affirmative action... They need to bring more descendants of African and American slavery into food service. And restaurant building and menus, and because that's real food. Like, you go to New Orleans, all the food's good. You go to Baton Rouge, all the food's good. Like, it's hard to fuck up. And you can't fuck up.
Well, no, it's easy to fuck up, but the ones that fuck up do not last long.
Right, so you can't fuck up. Like, you can't...
No.
You can't fuck up.
Otherwise, you will close your doors.
Right. And food in the North, for lack of a better term, I'm going to say above a certain place, or when in places where it gets cold for a majority of the year, the food tends to be bland. That's just kind of a rule. Like, you don't want to go to have... You don't purposely seek out lutefisk and other just...
What'd you call me?
and other foods of that nature, just willy-nilly. Like, lobster is fine, not for every meal. Like, you would have in Maine or up in, Cape Cod or something like that. It's all very, heavy creams, heavy sauces, just kind of... very stick. That's its own stick to your ribs food. At least in the South, you get spice and you get flavor.
Which I have to say, I went to when I was, I think it was high school. Yeah, I went on a road trip with my family, and we went up to Portland, Maine, and I had what they called lobster bisque.
Yeah, was it served in a shell?
No. But it was basically just a few chunks of lobster floating in some cream and a lot of butter. There was no salt. There was no pepper. No. There were no chives. There were no like sherry or anything. No. You go to the South and someone gives you bisque, it's going to taste of sherry and onion and like bell pepper and like...
Because that's a more traditional French preparation.
Right, but... Don't call it a bisque if it's not a bisque. Like, it was very disappointing.
Is that going to be the topic of this episode? Don't call it a bisque if it's not a bisque.
No, we have other things to talk about.
Did they consider bisque in college admissions? If you're darker than bisque.
We have various shades of bisque, but anyway.
I just can't wait for a college application to be like, Diva, may I call you Diva? Listen, Boots, we're just trying to get to the bottom of your ethnic background.
You're so stupid.
Oh, that's why you talk to me. But getting back to the Diana Ross and the Supremes Court, we
for those of you who
bone to pick.
Right, but for those of you who do not, like our Supreme Court coverage,
fuck you.
We're almost done because the Supreme Court term is over.
It's like people who are into baseball being like, look, it's baseball coverage for this period of the year. And that's fine because the Supreme Court is as American as baseball. And apple pie at Marie Callender's.
Yeah, true.
So we have...
It's the last bastion of hope in our government, that's for sure.
At this rate. So we discussed the previous case when it came to affirmative action. Mm-hmm. And then we listened to some analysis of it. But a couple more cases, big ones, have happened since then. You want to start with the religious exemption one, because I think that's a pretty clear.
I wanted to add one. I'm sorry. I wanted to add one quick footnote to the affirmative action one, because this was something that I read after we recorded, and we heard again, talked about on the analysis we listened to. I have a problem with the fact that the majority opinion added the caveat of military institutions, right? Like West Point, those type, Naval Academy, they are exempt from this ruling. They kind of said, we understand that our military needs to, be as diverse as possible, and we think that military academies should preserve this bastion of affirmative action is kind of what they're foot. Why? I really question.
Well, wasn't that where affirmative action was initially implemented?
Maybe.
In both like West Point and in other kinds of military, at the Citadel and other kinds of military academy recruitment. Like, I think that was where it was initially implemented. And so I think maybe they said at a federal level, because that is its own federal sort of bureaucracy, they have to figure that rule out on their own. This is particularly pertaining to universities that operate outside of that. Because UNC is a state school,
right,
and Harvard is a private school, which is why those were two different.
Yeah, and I understand that their official ruling was very narrow in the fact that it really only covered those two schools and said you can't do what you did.
Right.
People are making it a much bigger deal than it probably should be, and we'll take the win if we can. But I don't see the difference between. Okay, administratively maybe, but I don't see the difference in practice of having a forced diverse military academy versus a not forced diverse college, university.
I think the idea for a military academy is that also has to do with federal hiring and Title IX and all this other, or I think Title IX also covers race. Which one covers race? There's one of the titles. I don't know, Title IX covers gender, but also that. I think there was some idea of we can't touch that legislation because that legislation is not under consideration now. What's under consideration is just universities. And those operate different from schools that are designed specifically for military use and hiring. So I guess that they're probably saying bring up a case then and then we'll deal with it.
Okay, but still,
so it's like making sure it's narrow.
Right, but I guess my big takeaway is you're going to make this kind of... And again, it wasn't a sweeping decision, but some of the stuff written in the opinion was kind of, generalized. You're going to say, we value equality and colorblindness, because that's what the law and the Constitution stipulates.
Right.
Except over here, when it comes to military, there we value a non-colorblind and equity.
Right.
I don't agree or think that that's helpful.
Well, I think the idea was that we wanted a fighting force to represent everybody, all that crap. But again, I think that's something starting with Eisenhower in military desegregation, and in fact, an emphasis on hiring and recruiting people from different backgrounds, that was the thinking when it came to that. Which is why I also think that what was not overturned, or is still, I guess, on the books, is affirmative action when it comes to federal hiring, or companies that have companies that receive government funding hiring people. Because in California, they pushed it so far that you have to have, like, LGBTQ plus women, diverse people on your boards, or you cannot incorporate in the state, which was recently, I think, struck down. They said, look, you can't go that far. Like, that's insane. That's requiring you to have certain people in your office who may not be the best candidate for the job because of whatever reason. So that's, I think, the next battle with this, which is why it's the same thing with abortion. It's like, okay, well, now it's gone back to states to decide, but then states are going to decide certain things, and it's going to be like, oh, now this is challenged, and it has to go back, and this is challenged. One case has led to 5 more cases. But the first case has to happen when it comes to something like this. And in fact, as we talked about, or as you talked about, it was almost 20 years ago exactly that they considered their last affirmative action case, saying we're going to deal with this in 20 to 25 years, thus opening up the door for more consideration.
Right.
So,
and you're touching on something that I'm going to bring back later after we talk about the other stuff we want to talk about.
Well, the quick one, I think, and I think an important one, it being a unanimous decision, it was a federal postal worker who asked for Sundays off, and they could not, because I guess Amazon has a new thing now where they made a deal with the post office saying, well, you can deliver Amazon packages on Sundays because we're giving you money. And so they were like, all right. And I don't know how the Postal Workers Union agreed to this, because I thought the whole thing was that there was a union with very strict rules about when they could and could not operate. But they basically said, well, you have to come into work. And he's like, I'm sorry, I'm Christian, I cannot work on a Sunday. And they're like, okay, you have to come into work. And he's like, I can't come in today. And they're like, well, we're short-staffed, you have to come into work. He's like, okay, well, I'm not coming in. And finally he quit, because if they ask you to come in a certain number of times, you lose your job and you don't come in. So he's like, well, I don't want to do that and then lose out on your benefits, that you've accumulated or whatever in this job. So he left and sued and won. By the way, this shouldn't have even been a controversial situation.
Well, it wasn't.
Yes.
Because it was a unanimous decision.
A rare unanimous decision.
We've had, 3 of those this term?
I don't think that there's 3 in a term normally. I think that maybe there might be 1 if you're lucky. Or it'll be like an 8-1 objection, and then it's like, 1 Oscar the Grouch on the other side. So I think that was interesting. Were there any cases yesterday that we didn't cover? Because we covered the big one. There was that. There might have been one more. Let me look. Oh,
no, that was the other one. That was yesterday. The one you just brought up. The one about the postal worker. But there was one that you and I discussed even before that, which was about threats. So someone who was famous.
Yes.
I don't know who it was exactly. Someone who was famous was being stalked by someone on social media.
Yes.
He or she continuously blocked this person, and this person kept making more and more new accounts, and eventually created an account and said something like, you deserve to die, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
She took that as a threat. He or she, I'm assuming it was a she. Again, I don't know who the famous person was. She took it as a threat and sued or something of that nature. This happened years and years ago, of course, because litigation takes forever. And it eventually got pulled up to the Supreme Court, where they decided that the test for if something on social media or even just a verbal threat, the test for if it's a real threat is some kind of hybrid between objective and subjective. So
that was confusing.
Does the person being threatened feel like it's a legitimate threat? That's the fully subjective, and the fully objective being, does any other reasonable person who's not a party of this, would they read this and think this is a real threat? So I think they made some type of common ground between the two, because I understand the problems with both of those, viewpoints. You obviously can't go fully subjective, because I could say, something horrible to you, and you could be like, oh, I feel threatened, and so ergo that's a real threat, and I can sue you. That's bullshit. And you can't go completely completely objective, because if you have a shared understanding with someone and you say something that is threatening based on your shared knowledge or experience with this person, and someone else on the outside doesn't know that, they might not view what you said as a threat.
Right.
So there has to be some kind of middle ground here. And so I wasn't quite sure how I felt about...
I think on one spectrum it said, well, is the intent to be a threat? On another spectrum it said, the act of messaging unwantedly is an implicit threat. And I think it was like, where does it fall on that line of like, well, I didn't mean that was a threat, to all the way to like, well, this was unwanted, therefore it is a threat. And so they were trying to determine where that landed on the
continuum. Yes.
Yes, because I think that it was also a two-part case initially, because it was harassment. Like, it was like, you can get them on harassment, but you couldn't get them on threats, because there are many harassing messages
that are not threatening.
But do you take the volume of the messages as threatening, or do you take words out of specific messages that are threatening, even though the rest of them aren't? Like, how do you categorize all of that? But basically, what did they decide?
As far as I understood, they decided that to quantify something as a real threat, it has to sort of meet both standards of, the person being threatened has to feel that it's a threat, and or the person making the threat has to actually mean it as a real threat, and or someone from the outside can view this as a real threat. Like,
right.
We have to have some kind of test where it meets kind of all three of these prongs for it
right.
to be considered a, quote, real threat.
Right.
I understand, like, it's tricky. My problem is it's going to be a case-by-case basis, I honestly think. You can't just make a wide decision about, any threat that someone makes and just say, this is the definitive answer.
Well, I think that was basically what they said, is it should be a case-by-case basis.
I'm hoping.
Not just like an automatic triggering of a law.
It was a very, very tricky and complicated and convoluted opinion.
Like the opinion for the state elector thing. That was the one I didn't mention yesterday. And it was like 6-3 saying that something about an independent state legislature can choose the electors theory that had been floated, especially around the 2020 election, doesn't work. But this is another situation with like that electoral act that they tried in Congress and everything like this.
Well, no, it's passed.
It has, but it's a tricky situation where in the past few years, only recently, well, not since 1876, has it come into question about, well, what is an elector? Well, who can choose an elector? Well, what if there's fraud? Well, what do you do at that level? Like, does the state, can you have a governor direct a legislature to reject a slate of electors and send a different slate? Like, how does that work? It's really odd that wasn't figured out already, because elections are so part of law now, and they have to occur with such regularity and such procedure that something like that is a big change. In the same way that voting by mail is a big change, in the same way that not having an ID to vote or having like letting someone vote off a roll or a roster is a big change. And it's very strange to me that no one really has any interest. Someone mentioned it, I think, on Twitter yesterday or today, saying like, no one had any interest about fixing things after 2020, so that at least the uncertainty didn't happen again in whatever direction. Like, no one thought that maybe that was a smart idea to observe or fix or figure out, or who the fuck's phone is ringing? Is that the next door neighbor?
I think it's a it's a delivery truck, like, backing up signal.
Oh, because they have the new silent truck. What the fuck's that?
Yeah. So sorry for those who can hear that.
Oh god. But that's the thing I don't understand, is no one took the lesson of 2020 saying like, hey, can we at least figure out who's voting, have a very specific window to vote in, whether it's a day or a week for mail ballots or whatever it is, and at least have an idea of, if something gets close enough that there's an automatic recount, but only in some states it does that. In other states, like Georgia does this automatic recount under 0.5%, and they're the only people who do it, I think. That's weird. Like,
I think it's 1%, but
I thought it was 0.5%, but something like that. That's another thing. It's like, why is that even? Why are we even asking this as a question? That's the part that I don't understand, and I don't think it benefits anybody. People say, "Oh, it benefits Democrats," but I don't think it benefits anybody. It really doesn't, because if you are confident that you won, Why do you not have a system in place to do that? And if you're the one who lost, wouldn't you want to actually know that you lost? And so it's not like, oh, you know, there's no sour grapes if it's clear and above board. And I think that the whole, quote, election denier thing was used as a cudgel to be like, oh, you're just upset that you lost. It's like, well, if there was transparency in electoral outcomes, I don't think anyone would care. It's just a matter of there's not. And something seems very hinky.
Right. And
so that's why, like, the fact there's even a theory for how to count votes or use electors.
To put this in another kind of framework, because you're bringing this sort of point up, for a long time, more conservatives, the more conservative viewpoint was a lot of more things should be individually decided, and less, federal government overreach. There are certain things, though, that need to be standardized across, the 50 states. And I think one of them would be federal elections. So if you have procedures on how to count votes or how to place votes or any of those things, for a local election, fine, have your own little things. For a federal election, like for the president of the United States, right, it needs to be here's all the stipulations for every state. Done.
Like, what happened to 2000 when it was like, oh, there's ballots and then there's voting machines in Ohio in 2004 and there's all this stuff? Why are you counting votes differently for the same job? That makes no sense to me. Like, if you had... Okay, this is a very good example. If you were running a charity with a couple different chapters, like local chapters, like different, like one's in this part of town, one's in another part of town, one's in a neighboring town, and you all have to pick the president of the charity, and so everyone gets, one person, one vote, you all tab them in. Why on earth would you have one of the chapters count votes by a show of hands, another chapter count votes by like a blind post-it system, and a third chapter do votes by mail? Why? Like, that would be insane. And a fourth chapter, like, you just email them in. Like, you would obviously ask questions, because maybe this president could manipulate one chapter to have a show of hands, and then win because they're not all using the same rules. If you have a transparent and fair electoral system, and there's no cheating, or at least cheating is limited to where it can't affect the vote for more than a 0.25%, what are you so afraid of?
And why do we have states, the two, that are allowed to split electoral votes when none of the other states are allowed to do that?
That's banana, because they've shown that it's not a mathematical impossibility that those could swing an election just because they decided, oh, we have 3 and 2.
Right.
That doesn't make any sense. They need to get the shit together. And it's why I think a constitutional convention could be helpful, because I think that that's more important than abortion. I think that's more important than affirmative action. I think that's more important than a gay cake. I think it's more important than just about anything, because
a gay website.
A gay website, it's more important than anything.
So,
and the left would agree with that, and the right would agree.
We brought it up, so we might as well dive into this last topic, I think.
The gay site.
Yeah. So
this poor woman was asked to make an exclusive Pornhub.
Well, no, you made me think. Can you imagine if you are a very Christian person and you are approached
I don't have to imagine.
And you are approached by, a very non-Christian gay couple, and they ask you, you're a website designer. Can you design a website for our wedding and put this picture of me fisting him front and center on the wedding website? And she's horrified. She's like, "No, I'm not going to do that."
Saying, "Got my ring."
But we have a Supreme Court decision that would force the woman to look at this fisting picture and put it on her website. Thankfully, the Supreme Court did not decide that. But can you imagine if that were the case? Can you imagine the gay people who would be so vindictive and pissed off because they had, a Christian upbringing and they still resent all of that they would go find the most Christian, woman to be like, here, now put my nasty asshole pics all over your website. And like, we're that petty. We're that petty. We would do that.
But I just want to know. I want to know what entails a Christian website designer, because I can understand a Christian baker, like that seems like fine. But what's like like surfing on the web with Jesus? Like I'm fascinated that there's something where there's that. Also, as one of our friends said today, like, is it really that hard to set up a Squarespace account? Like, you can't do this yourself. Like, I'm sorry, if you can't figure that out, you're not going to figure out marriage gays. Like, also, why do you need a website for your wedding? That is the most insane thing that I've ever heard. Like, come.
Here's our registry.
Come to robinbiff.org to see us, upload your pictures. That's so. See, this is why they said that gay marriage would ruin other things. It did. Because only insane straight people make a website for their wedding. And most gay people are insane, decide to make a website for their wedding. That just seems like so odd.
But you can do it yourself. Anyway, another kind of win for...
It was a 6-3. It was a win for
freedom.
Religious protections of the First Amendment. Like, someone's like, look, that impinges on my speech and my free expression of my religion to be economically forced to do something I don't want to do. Right. And you can leave all the nasty Yelp reviews you want and say this person's a bigot and they don't want to make my fisting website or whatever. But
yeah, okay, and that's your freedom to do that.
It's also your freedom to do.
I think what it boils down to is
LGBTQ plus discrimination is now legal.
What it boils down to is we are a country of freedom, right? We have freedom is entailed in our documents of incorporation as a country, if you will. You are free to be an asshole. Like, can we title the episode that? You are free to be an asshole.
I can't put asshole in the title. I can't put fisting in the title.
You are free to be a dick. I can't put
exclusive Pornhub in the title.
No, you are free to be a horrible, horrible, nasty person. You are. You have that freedom.
I've taken advantage of that for years.
Yes, I know you have. You have that freedom. You can tell someone, no, I'm not going to serve you because you're this. No, I'm not going to serve you because of that. And hopefully, in a just world, which I think we live in one, you'll get enough backlash to be like, okay, well, now I fucked myself and now I have to close my doors because so many people refused to come to me because I said I was not going to do this for this one person.
If you fucked yourself, you wouldn't need a wedding website.
It is their prerogative to be an asshole. They have the freedom.
Well, I don't even think that it's being an asshole. I think it's just being like, I have the right to choose to do business with whoever I want.
Right.
And the fact that 3 people thought that it's okay to compel someone to do business that they choose not to do business with, that's kind of insane to me. Because people are like, oh, the Supreme Court's so weird. 6 people can fit in a submarine. Like, some horrible shit, But I'm surprised that no one's been like, wait, 3 people will compel you to economically engage with people you do not want to be engaging with. That's insane.
Right, but this also goes, the other way. If, Ketanji Brown Jackson owned a company and I was a far-right Nazi who hated, black people, Christians, all these people. I hated everyone but me. I could go to her business and be like, no, you are forced to serve me because of your mandates that you have made. Like, this goes both ways.
Well, who made that argument was, talking about church freedom, was Hillary Clinton. She was like, you can't have something called, like, the Church of the White Supremacist. I remember that clip of, like, the Church of the White Supremacist. But that's the part. That's what it comes down to. And that's why I think it's so silly that people think that it would have been ruled any other way. But now it's like have you heard the Biden sentence where he says something like, only in America can you be gay and get married in the morning and kicked out of a restaurant in the afternoon? Which is insane.
Please, kick me out of a restaurant. I've been kicked out of better places.
I've been kicked out of better calendars than this.
But to tie all this in a bow, I think...
I think we did.
A a lot of these Supreme Court cases this term especially, I think, boil down to one other thing. So obviously there's what I just said. You're free to be an asshole. But they also boil down to Congress, do your fucking job.
Yeah, that's what they've been saying for the past few years.
So many of these decisions, yes, especially this term, but even, reaching back to a few years, in the recent past, they're basically saying, well, we're only bound by the letter of the Constitution and the laws that you write.
Right.
And those so far do not allow us to say this or do this.
Right.
So we cannot rule from this bench saying we can't make law. It's your job to make law, Congress. So we're striking this down. Now go make a law about it if you really want it.
We have guidelines. We have to work within these guidelines. The guidelines are here. They're begging Congress to act, and Congress refuses to act. It all comes down to Dianne Feinstein.
It's
90 years young. And single.
Congress has become so ineffective that it's forced the executive branch to take on powers that they do not have, and it's forced the Supreme Court to take on cases where they're hoping they'll take on powers that they do not have, and at least thankfully, Supreme Court has consistently said, no, we can't do that. No, we can't do that. Like, do your fucking job. The executive branch is overreaching, as we saw with the student loan case that was also struck down.
Strucketh. The case that strucketh and the case that taketh away.
But again, that's another example. The executive branch overreach. Supreme Court said, can't do that. But Congress can.
The student loan thing, I think, was the clearest thing of being like, look, no matter how many executive orders and notes and stuff you want to make, you can't just unilaterally forgive government debt. That is an act of Congress. That is not within your purview. They knew that when they did what they did. They got the votes out of it, and it's no refunds, haha. I think that the fact that their first job upon election was not to either permanently end interest on federal student loans or issue some kind of moratorium or something like that. The fact that was not their first job, if you're upset about that, you should vote on every Democrat. Because they contributed to your student loans continuing interest past 2020, having a repayment thing that's reactivated. They did all these actions to add to your economic uncertainty. And I think I have to give DeSantis credit. He did say something to the effect of, look, the responsibility on paying these loans should go back on the universities that charge you this much in the first place. I agree. But, no one's come up with a solution to actually do that. And, of course, the universities will sue and win because they're like, well, we weren't supposed to guarantee these loans. This was a federal program. This wasn't us. But someone's going to have to fucking pay for it. I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of people with student loans. They're not going to get paid back somehow, or there's going to be a mass wave of defaults, and then the credit reporting agencies are just going to have to, reevaluate. Be like, that's not going to be considered in credit. Something is going to have to break at a certain point.
Right. Well, because
it's an unsustainable situation.
And the people of our generation, and I will admit, I am one of them, there's no, in the near future, there's no chance of having any type of, property ownership.
No.
There's going to be, let's survive, and that's about it.
And the problem is they traded the American dream of property ownership for the American dream of having a college degree. Over the past 50 to 60 years with the GI Bill and things like that. Remember, at that same time, the purpose of the GI Bill, everyone was like, oh, you can go get a college degree. No. The purpose of the GI Bill was to get a house. That whole post-war period of time, there was supposed to be lots of affordable housing. You and your family could move into it, because there was a housing shortage. In the late 40s to the early 50s, there were tents all the way up around LA and Long Beach and Orange County, whatever Orange County was then, because there were people who came back from the war and had no place to live. Right. So they had to figure out housing very quickly, which is what blew this city up into what it is now, or this whole region of Southern California. And it was you're guaranteed basically, healthcare and all that aside, which you were already guaranteed, obviously you're guaranteed 3 things when you get out of the military, after you come back from World War II. A job, an education, and a house. The most valuable of all of those is not the job, nor the education. It's the house. Because the house, no one can take away from you. The house is like a physical, actual place. You can not have a job and have a house. You cannot have an education and still have a house. You can't have an education and have no job and no house. You can't have a job and no education and no house. Like, those parts of the equation don't work. But it guaranteed you sort of like, you get a house. The house thing's been, obviously lost over time, 1970s till now. The education thing is all that's left. Because the job thing, well, shit, all those factories moved out. Like, that stuff doesn't happen anymore. So, unless they want to come up with a new homesteading act, or, new cities, which I heard Trump talk about, something, you're going to have a lot of people who have a lot of education and no job and no house.
Hi.
There you go.
Yeah, so all of you people on Twitter, I've been coming for a lot of people on Twitter.
Coming for you, bitch.
The whole afternoon, I've just been tweeting, saying, cry more, cry more. So all you people who are belly aching about these Supreme Court decisions, go fuck yourselves.